When you look at what are the abuses of children's rights, I think some of the worst abuses of children's rights are some of the violations against the kinds of protection issues. You know, children who were abducted into armies at very young ages, children who are trafficked for sexual exploitation or for child labor, children who are in the worst forms of child labor and as a result are excluded from going to school, violence against children. I mean, the list goes on and on. In addition, children have the right to health care and to education. These are areas where I think progress has been made, but much remains to be done. Well, it's child labor that first of all is labor that takes a child out of school and that usually is, taking them away from the basic protective practices. I mean, it's all relative to age, to the practices themselves, the danger it puts the child in, the hard labor that is involved. I mean, it's one thing to ask children to do chores around the house. It's another to put them into a brick-making factory or a rug-making factory full-time, taking them away from their families and their schools. Well, I think that certainly you have to be able to give children basic rights, rights against being subjected to extreme forms of violence. And I think certainly, there are triggers that certainly in developed countries that hospitals look for, that schools look for. If there appears to have been, harm done to a child, that can be raised before the authorities. And I think certainly a parent's rights have to be respected too, but there has to be that balance of protecting the child. It all comes down, again, to what's in the best interest of the child. No, I think the Convention on the Rights of the Child is really about all children everywhere, number one. And number two, the Millennium Development Goals have many of those goals that are directed at children, children's health, children's education, access to water and sanitation, nutrition. The measure is the same. Under 5 mortality, access to children to education, access to clean water and sanitation, access to adequate nutrition. I mean, you don't measure it differently in one country versus another. The rights don't change in one country versus another. Well, children are the future of the world. If we don't care about the children today, we're not preparing them to inherit the world of tomorrow. So if we leave children malnourished, therefore impacting their cognitive development, their ability to learn and to later earn as an adult, that will perpetuate the cycle of poverty. It's very important to invest in a child's education. An educated child is more likely to be a more productive adult. It's important to recognize the gender disparities in so many of these things, including education, and the fact that the girls are often the ones not given the education. And yet, girls and women provide, so much of the support, care, and economic empowerment of the family. I mean, when you look at the fact that around the world, 70% of smallholder farmers are women, providing that kind of support to the family, we have to look at the whole picture and see how the issues are interconnected. Well, obviously, the cost of not investing in children's health are children who are less healthy, less able to produce, lifelong problems that can cost even more in terms of a health investment later on, or it's a cost in terms of lives lost. Children who die of diseases that would not be necessary if they were vaccinated or got very simple treatment. The cost of not investing in education is not having a workforce for the future that will allow a country to have better economic development. The cost of allowing children to be subjected to violence, to sexual abuse, it's, that child will probably have difficulty recovering and producing throughout their life. So I think that, again, the investment in children pays dividends in the future, and oftentimes we don't look at that investment in children as really an investment in the future. Well, I think certainly the attention that's been put on child soldiers in the last several years has been very important in raising the profile of the issue, in making sure that people understand that this is a serious problem in many parts of the world, that children are being abducted many times to put into militias, into armies, and these are oftentimes very young children. I think as you look at very good depictions of what this is all about, like Ishmael Bey's book, A Long Way Gone, you get a real picture of what the life of a child soldier is truly about, what it means, and also how difficult it is for a child to then become rehabilitated, but certainly not impossible. And UNICEF works a lot in the rehabilitation of child soldiers, in getting child soldiers demobilized from these militias and these armies, in programs that will help them reintegrate into their communities. I think it depends on the country. I mean, many countries have adopted children's laws since the implementation of the CRC. I mean, that's some of the progress that's been made. And so we see more and more countries adopting the necessary legal frameworks. Many of them still need a lot of additional help in enforcement mechanism, training mechanisms. How do you train police, for example, to recognize violence against children, and then how to treat the children as victims? How do you prosecute such cases? How do you, treat children who have been subjected to sexual abuse? And there are very specific ways in which those kinds of programs need to be set up. So I think the legal structure is important. Also, the enforcement mechanisms are important to protect the children. Strengthening health systems, strengthening education systems, also critical to making sure that children get access to life-saving services and critical education. Well, I think the president in his campaign said it best. He said it's embarrassing that only the U.S. and Somalia have not ratified. I mean, there's many reasons, and it's not a question of, one administration or another, because it's really a question of the Congress ratifying a convention. It has, in large part, to do with the fact that we have 50 different states with 50 different laws, which makes it more difficult to ratify. It certainly doesn't make it impossible, and the U.S. should do everything possible that it can to make sure that this convention is ratified by the U.S. Congress.